So, we have a problem. This is Dr. Daniel W. Heber. He seems like a nice guy. He has a linguistics blog, and he makes videos about languages as well. He also specializes in the exact subfield of linguistics that I personally want to go into, namely typology and language preservation. He's also worked with communities that I would like to be able to personally do work with myself someday. So ideally, I shouldn't make him angry. But here's the thing. He had an opinion on the internet, which he really didn't need to say, and which I take special umbrage with. After some thought, I decided that it would probably be a good idea to make a proper response to this. Now, as of the final stages of editing this script, he appears to have taken down the blog post which accompanies this video. However, the video is still up on his YouTube channel and Instagram, and he's made no real comment about why it's not up anymore that I can find. So, given the amount of editing that has gone into this script, and the desire to not see what minimal productivity I have go to waste, I have elected to make this video anyway, because I think it could be a good learning experience. Plus, I may have sorta gotten a bit overinvested. So, let's get into it. Before I start, what is a conlang, I hear you asking? A conlang, short for constructed language, is a form of art and philosophical exercise in which a person or group designs a language system from the ground up. If you're familiar with Game of Thrones, Star Trek, or The Lord of the Rings, you've seen a conlang. Unfortunately, it's also often a derided form of art. It's a lot harder to appreciate a constructed language than, say, a painting of a bowl of fruit or a song about a bowl of fruit. Addie, I hear you proclaim, yet another video in which thou speakest on something inane? We, thy viewers, have already heard tell of these so-called languages, which men spin from their own delusions. But these languages are little more than flights of fancy. Fake languages, the lot of them. Why should I go create a language instead of learning a real one like Spanish, Mohawk, Quechua, Korean, Dutch, or any of the thousands of other languages spoken by people real and living? To us, this seems like a waste of time. Don't you advocate for people learning endangered languages? Should these artists not do that instead? Oh, viewer, oh, innocent viewer. Here, you reveal yourself to be woefully uninformed on this topic too. But fear not, I shall strike that misinformation from your mind space and leave you smarter than when you came. See, there are many reasons to make a conlang, and as a result, there are many types of conlangs. The most frequent of these are artlangs, which are languages intended for artistic purposes. Think Klingon or Na'vi. A lot of these are made as part of a broader artistic creation, like a book, movie, even music or poetry. There's also englangs, which are intended to achieve some functional purpose, like exploring precision or psychological effects. Maybe you've heard of Ithquil or Loglon, both of which are examples of this. Finally, there's auxlangs, which are languages intended to be used for international communication while remaining culturally neutral. These ones are less common, but they also represent one of the most successful groups. One auxlang, Esperanto, was designed by L.L. Zamenhof in the late 1880s. Today, it has an estimated 2 million potential speakers, including at least 2,000 native speakers, some of whom are second or even third generation. So, what does this have to do with Dr. Heber? Well, he unfortunately released a video to his blog at the end of last year, which I came across and which has irked me for quite some time. In it, he talks about why he doesn't like conlangs and why he doesn't give them time on his blog, which is certainly fine. Not only is he entitled to not make things he doesn't want to, he absolutely should make things that he does. I personally don't enjoy poetry myself, so I understand how you might not enjoy an art form and might not be thrilled by the idea of making content that doesn't interest you. But as best I can tell, his video isn't in response to anything. I don't see any comments demanding that he make videos about conlangs, which is what really confuses me. Why go out of your way to make a video about something you supposedly don't like? I don't make videos about why people shouldn't be wasting their time on poetry. Instead, I make videos about things that interest me. I hesitate to suggest that it's rage bait, but honestly, that's kinda all I can think of. To make things a bit worse, I feel his video propagates some unfortunate ideas about both conlangs and natural languages, and I didn't feel comfortable letting it go uncontested. So I want to use this as a chance to have my say and to defend the honor of both the art I hold so dear and Nat Lang's while we're at it. Dr. Heber breaks his video and blog post into 3 parts. The first of which is that, at least to him,
compared to real languages in the world, Conlangs are kind of boring.
And that
a lot of Conlangs wind up looking a lot like Indo-European languages or other major languages because Conlangers just don't know the diversity of other ways that languages can be.
In his blog, he also suggests that this might be because Conlangers feel that this would make their Conlangs easier to learn for the most people. This is not a very good point. I will say now that I don't actually think he knows much about Conlangs. He's probably basing his opinions off of the handful of languages he may have seen, which is fine. It's not his interest space, but it doesn't take much research to see how wrong that is. Of those 2 points, I can certainly say that the first is much more likely than the second, but even among Auxlangers, who are far from the majority, the goal of having others actually learn your Conlang isn't that common, with most of the Auxlangers I know doing it more as a thought experiment or a creative project. So marketability really isn't that big of a deal. I will personally admit that I do actually like using phonology that's easy for me to pronounce, but that's mostly because I like being able to say things in my Conlangs when I want to. And that's just a personal preference. And the lack of knowledge part doesn't make a lot of sense either, since new Conlangers have a tendency to learn everything they can, and often wind up making what we call a kitchen sink Conlang, occasionally called a Frankenlang, because they tend to include too many features from too many sources due to a lack of creative direction. Most people's first Conlangs are pretty bad for a reason, and it's not lack of information that causes that. The most skilled Conlangers display a remarkable degree of control and will draw inspiration from a specific language or language families when developing theirs. So diversity in the upper bounds of Conlangs is often not an issue either. In the supplemental video, the 2017 documentary Conlanging, The Art of Crafting Tongues, Mark Okrand, the Klingon guy, said something that I think is actually really apt to this.
In order to make a new language, brand new, you have to make it be different from something else. In order to make it be different from something else, you have to know what that something else is. So you have to know all about English or European languages or Chinese languages or whatever it is in order to make your language be not that. So as a result of working on these new constructs, whether it's vocabulary, grammar, phonology, whatever it is, you have to learn about and therefore get insights into stuff that's already there. So it's one of a number of mechanisms of learning about human language, even though you're making up what, for someone like me, is making up non-human languages for the most part.
There are very few other artistic endeavors which turn you into an expert in the thing your art seeks to emulate. Writing good science fiction doesn't require that you be an expert in physics. Making good music doesn't require you to be an expert in music theory. But making good Conlangs requires a significant amount of actual linguistics knowledge, such that some of the most talented and promising young linguists that I've met are Conlangers. Dr. Heber continues by saying that if the idea of an exotic and complex language excites you, then you'll get more out of studying languages like Navajo, ASL, Vietnamese, and Cree, among others. Now, I advocate that you learn endangered languages. It's good for you, and it's good for those communities. But the issue here is this levels the relationship between people and the languages they learn. For one, people don't usually decide what languages they learn based off of what they see as difficult. They do so based on personal interest and financial incentives. No matter how hard you try to convince me to learn an endangered language, if there simply isn't the personal connection or financial incentive to learn it, I'm not going to feel the drive to actually learn anything. And it doesn't help that many of these languages are spoken far from where I live. Learning them in reality does nothing for me and nothing for them. What good does some guy in the Bay Area learning Ainu or Quechua do for the communities that actually use them? What good does it do for me? Now, it could be that he actually means that I should learn local languages, and that might be true. But that isn't always an option, depending on where you live and what resources are available. Also, I live in the US, where learning minority languages isn't exactly free from political and historical complications. A lot of communities are very nervous around outsiders coming in to learn their languages, and while some are very eager to have as many people as possible learn their language, that varies from community to community, so maybe don't exactly rush out and learn a local language without confirming that they actually would be happy with that. The second of his points is that
they distort our understanding of how languages actually work.
suggesting that conlanging can give one the impression that natlangs are much more simple than they actually are, and that no conlanger could hope to approximate the complexity of a natlang. His second and stranger point is that
I think conlangs also sometimes give the impression that language is something that can be controlled.
in his blog post, he says, worse, conlangs propagate the notion that language can be controlled, molded by pedantic scholars or authoritarian politicians to reflect their own vision of how society should be. When it comes to his first point about natlangs and conlangs not working the same and that no conlanger could hope to come close to approximating either the complex irregularity or the depth and richness of a natural language, first of all, why not? Serious question, to what degree are languages irregular and riddled with exceptions? From what I've seen in the world's languages, inconsistencies and irregularities are not evenly distributed. A certain degree of irregularity is not a given in a natlang, and there exist natlangs which are highly regular, while some conlangs are explicitly irregular. Let's also not forget that not all conlangs seek to be naturalistic, and that it is a mistake to judge them on how naturalistic they are, if that's not the point. Of course, what Dr. Heber is probably trying to get at here is not morphological or syntactic depth, but rather cultural and historic depth. Now, for the moment, we will pretend that a conlang cannot start with a real history. Writing something down doesn't necessarily give it cultural significance or history, and while I have my criticisms of that idea, now isn't the place to discuss those. But the thing is, that doesn't mean they can't develop their own history, culture, or tradition. Esperantists have had nearly a century and a half to translate works of art, raise kids, and create new things whole cloth from their imagination. They have a real history and culture. Due to the internationalist motivations behind Esperanto's creation and the general progressive nature of the people who learn it, Esperantists have faced suspicion and outright oppression by authoritarian governments since the start. Germany, Japan, the USSR, and Spain all suppressed Esperanto to one degree or another. In Germany, Esperantists could wind up in concentration camps, while USSR policy led to the execution, exile, and imprisonment of Esperantists. And yet, in spite of all of that, it persists. Is there any wonder why Poland recognized Esperanto as part of its intangible cultural heritage in 2014? I don't speak Esperanto, but I have nothing but respect for the community it has fostered and hope for its further survival and growth. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the Klingon language community has heavy cultural touchstones in Star Trek and the broader geek space, from which it inherits a lot. It might not be as big or lofty as Esperanto, but a group of people coming together to find community in a language which didn't exist 100 years ago is laudable in and of itself. It's also been working to distance itself from Star Trek. Klingon artists have begun thinking about the future of Klingon as more than just a language spoken by fictional aliens. They have conventions, translate art and literature, make music, and build community. People use Klingon too, and I cannot stress this enough, have intimate and personal conversations. To disregard these as not having the sort of depth or richness of a natural language is, I think, at least a little disrespectful and dismissive to these people and the communities they have built. But more importantly, in regards to his second point, this seems really uninformed. The idea that conlanging might make you think that a language can be controlled is actually just outright slander. First of all, conlangers do not believe this, nor do they enable that perspective. The idea that conlanging instills this idea in anyone is both being asserted without evidence and flies in the face of my experiences and the experiences of many conlangers who found linguistics through this art. I have no idea how you could even come to that conclusion. As artists, natural languages and their diversity are something we care deeply about. I clashed with English teachers throughout high school over their belief that there was a right way to speak English, and it was through conlanging that I gained the knowledge and confidence to challenge them on that. If anything, English majors and the general population who learn languages from textbooks would be the ones internalizing and propagating that belief. The idea that languages can be conceived of as logic puzzles is not something intrinsically instilled by conlanging, but is something studying a language can do. When I took Latin, I did so under the grammar translation method, which I've been told used to be the norm for most language teaching. In effect, I was taught Latin, not as a language I could speak, but as an actual puzzle intended for me to solve. I once complained to a friend that the worst part about learning Latin was getting good grades while feeling like all I'm doing is acting as an intermediary between the homework and the textbook. If I'd only studied Latin with none of my linguistics or conlanging background, I almost certainly would have gotten the idea that prescriptivism is just the way languages are interacted with, and I might have been turned off from learning languages altogether. Conlanging, by contrast, serves as a real primer to the field of linguistics. It's hard to escape the realization that descriptivism is the superior way to interface with and study languages. This is not an unusual story. I've met plenty of other linguists in my rough age group who found linguistics through conlanging. I have sat through presentations at conferences given by people doing research on conlangs. Much of the linguistics edutainment space on YouTube is made up of conlangers. The future of linguistics is found in conlanging and conlangers. And to suggest that those with an interest in constructed languages are wasting their time is to risk shaming people out of becoming linguists. When so many languages are dying out, is that really responsible? He ends this section by quoting the economist Friedrich Hayek, who is, notably, not a linguist, by saying,
language as something that is the result of human action, but not of human design.
So, the use of this quote is particularly interesting. Even if we grant an economist any authority on the topic of linguistics, as best I can tell, that's not what Hayek said. The quote does technically define the concept of spontaneous order, which can be used to describe languages, but Hayek wasn't talking about that. He was talking about the economy. Also, the quote isn't Hayek's, it's actually Hayek paraphrasing a quote from Adam Ferguson, also not a linguist, who was talking about institutions? In the final part, he brings up the fact that there's so many natural languages that could use the attention so much more. And in his blog post, he brings up some statistics about how dire the state of many natural languages are. What's important to note here is he's entirely right. Natural languages are going extinct at a rate that fills linguists the world over with dread. More support is desperately needed for languages, and with how fast speakers are dying out, we need that support last fucking week in order to really make that difference. It doesn't help that these deaths are entirely tied to climate change and modern capitalism, which are forcing many communities to move elsewhere for better economic opportunities and leaving communities less and less able to preserve their cultures in a context that does justice to them. Which is why the second half of this section is so bad. Dr. Heber immediately pivots from a real call for aid to be provided to the languages of the world to casting blame. He asserts that he knows several people who've spent years creating grammatical descriptions of conlangs and has seen entire communities that have come together to make dictionaries. This is completely true. I personally see it as amazing that the internet has enabled people to learn linguistics to such a degree that they can describe conlangs from scratch like that, and that conlangs are having such success that people are finding community in them. I have a friend learning Mandalorian. That's pretty cool. There are people who met and married their partner using only Esperanto. How awesome is that? If something has inspired you to learn a language and meet new people, no matter the origins of that language, I think that's nothing if not a good thing. But Dr. Heber doesn't appear to agree. He asks how great it would be if people put that same passion towards documenting and revitalizing indigenous languages. He suggests that it would raise so much awareness of language endangerment and make so many resources available if the media used endangered languages, even if it were just as stand-ins for fictional ones. Now, while he does specify that it should be done respectfully and with community involvement, there's still so much wrong with this bit. First, this entire point is a slice of the pie fallacy. He is suggesting that by creating conlangs and providing support to learners of those conlangs that we are necessarily not doing the same for natlangs, or that those resources are coming at the cost of them not going to natlangs. This is not true. Language preservation and support is not a zero-sum game. The lack of media translation into endangered languages or use of endangered languages is not driven by the use of conlangs. It's driven by a lack of funding and the lack of a market for it. It wasn't until fairly recently that Icelandic was supported by iPhones, and only just for dates. Icelandic speakers have to effectively use their phone in a language that is not their native one if they want to have an iPhone. This is actually a problem for plenty of languages, some with literally tens of millions of speakers. Conlangs aren't the reason for the lack of support for these languages. English and the current nature of investment in marginalized communities is. As to that bit about using minority languages in media as stand-ins for a fictional one, that is so messed up. First of all, many fictional languages are spoken by the bad guys or by less civilized groups. Which natural language should the Klingons, famously literal aliens obsessed with war and martial combat, speak? What language do the servants of the Dark Lord use? I can't personally imagine any minority language community would be entirely thrilled to have their languages used in those contexts. But also, as a Conlanger, a world builder, and a hobby writer, I take issue with the idea that my languages, which are integral to the politics, cultures, and histories of my world, sometimes even the plots, could just be replaced with a natural language. In some cases, that defeats the actual point of using a Conlang in the first place. Tolkien designed his worlds for his languages. To use a different language would be disrespectful to him as an artist and defeat the point of the work he did on them. I also can't imagine how terrible it would be to suddenly have half the speakers of a natural language do so because they saw it used on Star Trek, or how annoying it would be for someone speaking their heritage language to automatically be assumed to be a member of the associated fandom, which is, I cannot stress this enough, the inevitable consequence of using a natural language like that. He finishes this point up by suggesting that if actors can be taught to speak Dothraki or Quenya, then they can learn Mohawk. He proposes that endangered language communities would be thrilled to see their languages on the big screen. He's right. They absolutely would. Which is why the correct answer is not to get mad about Esperanto and Klingon being on Duolingo, but to get mad that minority language speaking creatives aren't receiving the funding and encouragement to tell their stories in the first place. I'd like to end this response section with a quote from his video that I think encapsulates the problems with his argument.
Yes, they're fun, I get into them myself, but on the whole, I'd really love to see more focus and attention being given to the real languages in the world that could really use that attention.
The most important issue with this quote is the term real languages. It's something I'm honestly disturbed to see another linguist use. First and foremost, the term real in the context of languages has historically been used to shut down and other speakers of marginalized varieties. And he uses it, and similar terms, several times in this video. Any self-respecting linguist, especially one working with marginalized languages, should avoid using that phrasing like the plague. Secondly, Conlangs are real languages. They are systems of communication governed by an underlying set of rules which humans can and do use to communicate. In his video, he referenced Esperanto repeatedly, so it is here that I will remind everyone that there are an estimated 2 million speakers of Esperanto worldwide, including an estimated native speaker population of more than 2,000, some of whom are second or even third generation. They faced real historical oppression, with some countries making it illegal to speak their language under penalty of imprisonment or death. It is irresponsible and bigoted to propose that Esperanto is not a real language, and to lament the support it receives because other languages aren't receiving the same. To a less important degree, I don't know about you, but this comment really reeks of being either a lie to placate Conlangers or of a deep personal shame for his own interest in conlanging. It feels disingenuous. I assume he's just trying to moderate the tone without being too heavy-handed to avoid an argument, but if it's not an attempt to avoid an argument, then it speaks to a deep-seated personal shame about a potential passion, which leaves me feeling sad. I wonder if he's avoided conlanging in the past because he feels like he's letting Natlangs down. If that's the case, he really should stop, because taking shame in your interests isn't good for you. Given how many young linguists, myself included, find this field through the art of conlanging, I worry that if he manages to instill that shame into his audience, then they may just abandon linguistics, conlanging, and natural language preservation altogether, and that could do incredible harm to the natural language preservation effort. I think the correct place to end this video is on a hypothetical. If tomorrow we discovered that a minority language, any minority language, Basque, Ainu, Mohawk, Welsh, you name it, was invented by a group of people in the 1800s, would that make their desire to preserve that language and its community any less worthy? Would it make the desire to learn and connect with that community any less valid? Would that make the culture built around that language any less real to the people who participate in it? Would it make the suppression of those languages any less despicable? If yes, what if it were invented 500 years ago? 1,000, 5,000, 10,000? How many years need to pass, Dr. Heber, before you give up and realize that the origins of a language are utterly irrelevant in whether or not it deserves respect and support? Sure, most Conlangs might not have need for that support, but to create content disparaging the communities that interact with these languages achieves nothing and wastes time that could have been spent learning a language that needs your support. Hey, so that was a video. I know I promised that I would need to be polite at the beginning, but I write these videos in multiple stages, and the final revision wound up getting me kinda riled up at some of the things he said. If you can't tell, I feel really strongly about constructed languages, both as someone who makes them and as someone who's studied linguistics. Conlanging for a lot of people, myself included, can be a form of self-expression. My primary conlang has more than a decade of time and careful thought put into it. I don't know if I'll ever be finished with it. It's my typologically unusual, verb-heavy, adjective-hating monstrosity. It's an act of intimate self-reflection, and at times it was an act of rebellion for me. I found power in the ability to name the world on my own terms, to tear down semantic walls and create the terms of my own self-expression. So I take issue when I see linguists who really should know better disregard an art form which our field relies on for the cultivation of new talent. It's an all too common thing in the field, and while it is changing, I don't think it's changing fast enough. On the other side of things, since this video is also about minority languages and their communities, please learn them. I count one of the best experiences I've had as being able to participate in the UC Riverside Kawia course, even if it was just to audit the class. More and more minority languages are getting some degree of support, and you can play a role in furthering that. If you don't have the connection to a local community, I highly suggest finding minority languages that you do have a connection to. Though my primary interest is in the languages of North America, I do genuinely want to be able to learn Australeonese one day, and I'm sure that everyone watching this video will have at least one such language if they really think about it. Minority languages are dying out at a concerning rate, and you can make that difference. If you aren't a linguist, and you want to help document your heritage language, I suggest you pick up conlanging. A lot of resources made to help people get into the hobby are also great introductory resources to linguistics as a whole, and that knowledge can easily be repurposed to help you document your language. You don't need a fancy degree to make a well-formatted dictionary and a basic grammar. Finally, I have some good news. As you know, I recently released 2 videos, one about spelling reforms and one about my time spent as a canvasser. Canvassing is, I think, my best video yet. I'm incredibly proud of it. I'm planning to do a follow-up on it, and I'm talking with some other canvassers I know to add their experiences to the video. I don't know when I'll get around to making it, but hopefully that'll happen sometime soon. Also, my channel has recently hit the requirements to get monetized, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. My spelling reform video really pushed me over the threshold for that, which was both good and very scary for me. I was not expecting that much of a reaction. Thank you so much to everyone who has watched my videos and all the wonderful things you've said. Finally, this should probably excite some people. I'm currently planning on making a newer, better version of my spelling reform video because the first one was kinda rushed, unfortunately, and I feel like I have a lot more to say on the topic. Also, I want to do a remake of all of my pre-canvassing videos from scratch with better audio and editing. Yes, that includes remakes of Cultist Sim Lore 1, 2, and 3. I've unfortunately been struggling with writer's block for the 4th video. I don't know when that will come out, but hopefully I'll be able to get the newer versions of the first 3 out sometime soonish, and that should give you guys something to hold you over. And with that, I'd like to say, have a wonderful day.